Arms transfers and intelligence transfers, if they had ever been stopped, have been resumed. This was part of the deal that Donald Trump's emissaries in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, made with the emissary of Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. So the weapons are going to be flowing again, in full flow, you might say. The intelligence, perhaps even more important at this stage, has also been resumed. Elon Musk's satellites are presumably right now beaming this show to the people who put me on a Ukrainian death list. What can you say about that? Elon Musk has just suspended the No Conscription League Twitter feed before it had issued a single original tweet. I've asked him to explain why, but answer so far has there been none. The intelligence and arms resumptions were only part of the story. It was a double whammy. Marco Rubio announced in a press conference, without any reference to Russia at all, without a single telephone call on the newly restored hotlines to the Kremlin, that there was going to be a 30-day ceasefire and that Ukraine had accepted it. He must know that the Russians could not possibly accept such a unilateral ceasefire, not the least because the new flow of American weapons, the new flow of American intelligence, the declared exponential rise in flow of both weapons and intelligence from the European Union and the United Kingdom would mean that that 30 days would only be used, as Minsk 1 and 2 were used, to strengthen Ukraine and its armed forces for the next round of fighting, approximately 30 days later. Russia has stated right from the beginning that it is not interested in a ceasefire. It is interested in a deal that removes the causes of the war, which I have adumbrated here many times, but in shorthand, they are this: that Ukraine must be a completely neutral country. No Ukraine in NATO, no NATO in Ukraine, no NATO weapons, no NATO expertise, no NATO in camouflage, in mercenary form, nothing. Rien, zilch, absolutely neutral. That Ukraine must be demilitarized so that it cannot again be in a position to act as a proxy army for the NATO forces, reduced to something like 87,000 soldiers from the million men that it had in arms at the beginning of this conflict. A denazification, that is to say, the end of the overweening influence of the Azov and other Nazi and neo-Nazi and fascist and ultra-nationalist formations that are the sinews of the war, the sinews of the Zelensky regime. No transfer of territory. The idea that these liberated areas full of ethnic Russians, Russian-speaking people, who with tears in their eyes right now are welcoming the Russian forces as they arrive, they will never return to rule by Kiev. They would never have left rule by Kiev if Minsk II had not been a simple deceit. In fact, other than Crimea, all of the Ukrainian territory, as was before the Russian invasion, would still and forever be in Ukraine. But Minsk II was a systematic deception in which the leaders of Germany and France and then the Security Council were completely complicit. They have admitted, Hollande and Merkel have admitted, that Minsk II was used to make Ukraine strong enough to confront Russia on NATO's behalf. This is not me saying this. This is them saying this. So the idea that Putin's going to agree to a Minsk III would appear entirely fanciful. As I say, either Donald Trump has been woefully misled by his advisors, or Donald Trump has been misleading the rest of us all along, including misleading the American people throughout his election campaign. You'll remember the pledge. 24 hours, he said, it would take him to bring about an end to the hostilities in Ukraine. And he would appear to have been lying. I'm sorry to say that, for I am one of those who had been misled. Now, there is a third possibility, and we shouldn't rule it out just yet, and of course we'll cover it on Sunday if it turns out to be a development. A third possibility is that this did not come as a surprise to the Russians, and that it comes with a bundle of other things of which we have as yet no knowledge. It could be because Moscow has not yet spoken, will not speak, until it receives official confirmation of what was agreed between the US and Zelensky's emissary in Riyadh when Donald Trump speaks with President Putin on Friday. So we have to hold back from a comprehensive denunciation of Donald Trump in this regard. But I have very little doubt that it is, in fact, a calculated deception. If I was in any doubt, the exact wording of the United States pronunciamento was replicated by every single NATO government. Right down to the tennis metaphor, the ball is now in Russia's court. It cannot be an accident that every single person that hates Russia in the European Power League tweeted exactly the same thing as the United States government tweeted. It cannot have escaped Donald Trump's notice unless he's really not paying attention that all these people hate him very much indeed. That all these people are planning to a greater or lesser extent to bring him down, to paralyze his second presidency in the way that they paralyzed his first. That they are constantly name-calling, blackguarding, libeling, defaming him, and that Ukraine itself isn't just urinating on his picture, isn't just defenestrating any and all Americana in their paraphernalia, including ripping off American patches from their sleeves, but that the NATO death cult, the NATO death squads, may very well have been involved in at least the second of the attempts on his life, which came so very close to success. A bullet penetrating his face, his ear, luckily. This man that we know nothing about, that penetrated Trump's ear, may or may not turn out to have links with Ukraine. But the man who tried to kill him on the golf course in Florida was actually a frequent visitor to Kiev and a frequent collaborator with the most extreme Ukrainian elements, and was recruiting mercenaries to go and fight in Ukraine. That much we do know about the second of the assassins who set about killing President Donald Trump. So how comfortable Trump feels in the company of Macron and Starmer and little soldier Schultz and Anna Baerbock and all the other traducers of his presidency and character, I'm not sure. How comfortable he now feels hugging little Zelensky, who so gratuitously insulted him and the Vice President J.D. Vance in the Oval Office itself, I've really no idea. So there are three possibilities. Either Trump is being fooled, or Trump fooled us, or something's going to happen on Friday in the telephone call between Trump and Putin, of which we can only speculate. And no doubt in the course of this show, particularly with the interview with the one and only Scott Ritter towards the end of the show, about which more later, maybe Scott Ritter will be able to enlighten us on what alternative possibility there might be. But if we take it at face value, Trump has now, having been the candidate who was going to halt the war in 24 hours, the president who may have to preside over the continuation of the war until every last inch of the Ukrainian state is conquered by the Russian forces, which is beginning to happen. The withdrawal, as Zelensky says, in fact, a rout of the 10 scores of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers trapped in the Kursk bulge is already well underway. A huge uptick in the number of people surrendering and stragglers making their own way by foot, if necessary, out of Kursk and back into the internationally recognized Ukrainian frontiers. This was supposed to be Zelensky's prime card. Now he doesn't hold any cards, literally, as Donald Trump himself said. The incremental, day by day, hour by hour advances of the Russian forces right across the line of contact will not stop before the river Dnieper. The Dnipro is the obvious partition point of the Russian and Ukraine spheres that will be left at the end of this war. Russia will not stop fighting until that is achieved. It will not stop fighting until Odessa, the archetypal Russian city, is liberated in the south, and Kharkov, another archetypal Russian city, is liberated in the north. So anyone who thinks that Putin, having sacrificed so much blood and treasure of his own people, is going to accept a ceasefire dictated by the person who's losing the war, and who's losing it bigly, as Donald Trump would say, has no appreciation of Vladimir Putin's skills as a negotiator at all. Putin is not anybody's pushover, but I can assure you, from my own personal and certain knowledge, that there are many people in Russia who believe that Putin has been far too soft on the Kiev regime, that some things that are being done now, inexplicably, weren't done 2 years ago. The mercenary hotels that are now regularly being exploded could have been exploded at any time. The docks in Odessa, destroyed this week, could have been destroyed 2 years ago. The way in which Putin has prosecuted the war is severely criticized by many military personnel on the front line who cannot understand why this softly catchy monkey approach is being taken. So there's no possibility for both of those reasons. Putin's skills and the pressure on Putin from people who want to fight this war to its conclusion, never mind any ceasefires or deals, mean that Trump is likely to be disappointed on Friday in the telephone call. But what happens then? That means Donald Trump now owns the Ukraine war. When he had a possibility to pivot away from it entirely, to end the arms sales, to end the intelligence sharing, to simply walk away after the behavior of Zelensky in the Oval Office, he's now lost. He now holds the entire future of this war in his hands. And the defeat of Ukraine will now be his defeat also. It's hardly making America great again. It's hardly putting America first. And it's very difficult at this distance to know why on earth he has done this. The other subject we'll be dealing with this evening is the onslaught, the pogrom, the massacre, the attempted genocide of the minority populations in Syria. The Jolani head-chopping, heart-eating, coat-thrutting, throat-cutting elements in the West and in Syria itself have spent most of this week trying to deny that which we have seen with our own eyes. And we saw it with our own eyes through the lens of the people who were carrying out the genocidal acts. It's like that great Groucho Marx gag of when his wife came in to the bedroom and found him in bed with his secretary. Naturally enough, she went bananas. And he leapt out of bed and he said, "Nothing happened, nothing happened. Who are you going to believe, me or the evidence of your own eyes?" Well, who are you going to believe about Syria? The evidence of your own eyes, I would have hoped, which were given. That evidence was given by the killers, the mass murderers themselves. Daily, hourly, we watch videos as horrific, every bit as horrific as the Israeli genocide in Gaza was to the consciousness. Some of them claim that they are old videos. Maybe some of them are, but I'm really not sure what point that makes. The old videos were carried out by the same people who are carrying out the same kind of atrocity today. It was Al-Qaeda and ISIS, rebranded as HTS, and now the so-called government of Syria that committed all these crimes over the last 13 years, that carried out all the head choppings, crucifixions, throat cuttings, mass murder of people for no other reason that they did not fit the tiny, narrow, takfiri, fanatic Islamist politics of the HTS, as it now is called. Now, this means that mainstream Sunnis, who are the majority in Syria, the Arab Sunni population of Syria is some 56% of the population. The Kurdish Sunnis have to be added to that if we're talking in sectarian confessional terms. And the idea that this is something that is about Assad remnants is for the birds. Anybody who believes that will believe Netanyahu when he claims he's only killing Hamas in Gaza. You know that that is false. You know that the media who told you that were lying to you. So why would you believe them when they tell you, as so many of them do, including the now infamous Al Jazeera, which tells you that these killings were of Assad remnants, when you saw the people being killed, because the killers videoed it and put their video out on air. Why would you believe that? You know that they lied to you on so many things, most recently on Gaza. Why would you believe them now? So, if you're a Sunni who doesn't share the takfiri mentality of these cutthroats, then you will be killed, as a respected Sunni sheikh in Idlib, from Idlib, was murdered just a day or two ago. You know their attitude to the Christians in Syria. Christians to Beirut, Alawites to the grave. That's their slogan. Now, the Alawites are a substantial population. Unfortunately, the Christian population has, for the most part, if it could get there, flown to Beirut, knowing that if they did not, their persons would suffer the same persecution and destruction as their religious buildings, churches, seminaries, convents, and so on have already suffered. The Alawites on the coast are now sheltering in their thousands in the Russian airbase that lies between Latakia and Tartus. That Russian airbase may turn out to be very important, because one of the items on the agenda on the phone call between Trump and Putin tomorrow is how the two men, the two countries, can act for a change together to come to the rescue of the people being slaughtered by the people that the West put into power in Syria in the first place. It's all going to be dealt with by Syrian girl our first guest right after this. Stay tuned.